I never thought shoveling snow for my neighbors would lead to a full-blown war, but that's exactly what happened. It all started because I own a small landscaping and snow removal business, just a couple of trucks and some good equipment. For 10 years, I'd lived in the Oak Meadows subdivision, a quiet place with decent people where neighborly help was just part of the deal. The homeowners association was mostly a formality, a group that made sure the little park at the entrance was mowed and the holiday lights went up in December. It was benign, almost invisible, and that's how we all liked it. My name is Frank, and I've always believed in a simple philosophy: do good work, be a good neighbor, and don't cause trouble. My business was built on that. I was reliable, fair, and I treated my clients' properties like my own. In my own neighborhood, I was just Frank, the guy with the plow. When a big storm hit, I'd often do a quick pass down our street before my official route started, just to make it easier for everyone to get out. Nobody asked me to, I just did it. It was the right thing to do. The quiet harmony of Oak Meadows began to curdle about a year before the war started. That was when Brenda Thompson moved in. She and her husband bought the corner house on the main loop, a nice 2-story colonial that had belonged to the Millers, a sweet couple who retired to Florida. Brenda immediately saw the HOA not as a passive entity for basic maintenance, but as a vehicle for her ambition. She was a woman who radiated a kind of aggressive dissatisfaction, as if the world was constantly failing to meet her very specific and unyielding standards. Within 6 months, she had attended every meeting, volunteered for every committee, and positioned herself as the only person who truly cared about maintaining property values. The existing board was made up of older residents who were tired and disorganized. Brenda, with her sharp suits and binders full of color-coded tabs, steamrolled them. She was elected president in a poorly attended meeting that most of us didn't even know was happening. And that's when the changes began. At first, they were small annoyances. A flurry of emails and notices taped to our doors. Trash receptacles could no longer be visible from the street except on collection day, and even then, only between the hours of 6 a.m. and 7 p.m. A violation would result in a $25 fine. Then came the mailbox mandate. All mailboxes had to be the exact same model, purchased from a specific online retailer, and painted with one of 3 approved shades of black. The community grumbled, but most people, myself included, just sighed and complied. It was easier than fighting over the color of a mailbox. The rules kept coming, each one more specific and controlling than the last. Lawn height was to be maintained between 2.5 and 3 inches. Holiday decorations could be displayed no earlier than the day after Thanksgiving and had to be removed by January 2nd. No exceptions. She created an architectural review committee, which consisted of herself and 2 allies she'd managed to get onto the board, who had to approve any exterior change to a home, right down to the color of your front door. People were annoyed, but life was busy. It was always easier to just paint the door or move a trash can than to attend a 3-hour meeting to argue with a woman who clearly relished conflict. Her power grew in the vacuum of our collective apathy. We were frogs in a pot of slowly warming water, and Brenda was cranking up the heat. I tried to stay off her radar. My lawn was immaculate, my trash cans were hidden, and my mailbox was the correct shade of midnight majesty black. I just wanted to be left alone to run my business and live my life. That, however, was not part of Brenda's plan. The inciting incident, the spark that lit the fuse, arrived in the form of the worst blizzard our state had seen in 20 years. It came fast and hard, dumping nearly 3 feet of dense, heavy snow in less than 24 hours. The world outside was a silent, white blanket of chaos. City plows were overwhelmed, they wouldn't be getting to secondary roads like ours for at least a day, maybe 2. People were trapped. I knew what this meant for my business. It was going to be a long, exhausting, but profitable few days. But before I started my commercial contracts, I did what I always did. I fired up my big Ford F-350 with the heavy-duty plow attached, its diesel engine rumbling to life in the pre-dawn stillness. The snow was piled so high it came over the top of the blade. I made a first pass down our street, clearing a single lane so a car could get through in an emergency. Then I cleared the area around the community mailboxes. My last stop before heading out was at Mrs. Gable's house. She was a widow in her 80s who lived a few doors down. Her husband had passed away a few years prior, and her kids lived out of state. She was a sweet, frail woman who baked cookies for the neighborhood kids and always had a kind word. There was no way she could handle this kind of snow. I spent 20 minutes clearing her driveway and the path to her front door. She flickered her porch light in thanks, a little signal we'd had for years. It made me feel good. It was the neighborly thing to do. I didn't think another thing of it as I drove off to start my long day of work. I got home well after dark, exhausted to the bone, muscles aching. I just sat down with a hot meal when there was a loud, insistent pounding on my front door. Not a friendly knock. A summons. I opened the door to find Brenda Thompson standing on my porch, illuminated by the cold, white light. She was bundled in an expensive-looking parka, her face pinched with fury. "Frank," she said, her voice sharp and devoid of any pleasantry. "We need to talk about your flagrant violation of the community bylaws." I was too tired for this. "Brenda, it's 9 o'clock and I've been plowing for 16 hours. What on earth are you talking about?" She held up a clipboard, tapping a page with a gloved finger. "I am talking about Article 7, Section 4 of the Oak Meadows Covenants, Conditions, and Restrictions. No commercial activity shall be conducted from any residence, nor shall any commercial vehicles be parked on community property, except for the express purpose of providing a sanctioned service to a resident during approved hours." I stared at her, uncomprehending. "I live here, Brenda. And this is my truck. I'm allowed to park it in my own driveway." "Not when you are using it for unauthorized commercial purposes," she snapped back. "You plowed the entire street. That is a service that should have been contracted by the HOA, following a proper bidding process. You also performed a service for 84, Cherry Lane, Mrs. Gable's residence. Was that a sanctioned, paid service?" The sheer absurdity of it took my breath away. I was being a neighbor, Brenda. I was helping an old woman who is trapped in her house. I didn't charge her a dime. I was clearing the street so an ambulance could get through if it needed to. It's called being a decent human being. Her eyes narrowed. It's called a violation. You used a commercial vehicle to perform a non-sanctioned service on community property. You have undermined the authority of the HOA and exposed the community to potential liability. What if you had damaged the curb? Or a mailbox? Your personal insurance would not cover it under a commercial operation. I finally felt a surge of anger cut through my exhaustion. That's ridiculous. I'm fully insured, and I've been doing this for years. Nobody has ever had a problem with it. In fact, most people are grateful. "Well, I have a problem with it," she said, her voice rising. "This is not some lawless frontier, Frank. We have rules for a reason. They protect our property values and ensure fairness." She made a checkmark on her sheet. "You are hereby officially warned. A repeat violation will result in a $250 fine. A third violation will result in a $500 fine and a lien against your property. Do you understand?" I just stared at her. This wasn't about rules. This was about power. My simple act of kindness was a challenge to her absolute control. I had acted independently, for the good of the community, without her permission. And for a petty tyrant like Brenda, that was the greatest sin of all. "You're fining me for helping my neighbors?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. "I am warning you for violating the bylaws," she corrected, her tone dripping with condescension. "I suggest you read them." "Good night." She turned on her heel and marched back through the snow, a self-satisfied little dictator who had just put a peasant back in his place. I closed the door, the warmth of my house doing nothing to thaw the icy knot of fury and disbelief in my stomach. The war had begun. The official warning letter arrived 2 days later, a crisp, professionally printed document that reiterated Brenda's threats in cold, legalistic language. It felt surreal. I crumpled it up and threw it in the trash. I figured it was just Brenda being Brenda, a power trip that would blow over. I was wrong. The snow was a trigger for her, a chance to assert her authority in a visible way. For the next few weeks, she was relentless. A neighbor 2 streets over received a $100 fine because his son's basketball hoop was, according to Brenda's precise measurements, 3 inches too close to the sidewalk. Another family was cited for having a small, inflatable snowman in their yard 2 days after the January 2nd deadline. The atmosphere in the neighborhood grew tense. People started talking, whispering in their driveways and on walks, but no one wanted to be the one to challenge her directly. They had seen what happened to me. My first fine arrived a month later. Another storm, much smaller this time, dropped about 6 inches of snow. I didn't plow the whole street, but I did clear Mrs. Gable's driveway again. I wasn't going to let that poor woman be snowed in because of Brenda's nonsense. The next morning, a bright orange violation notice was stuck to my front door, citing the same ridiculous bylaw. Tucked inside was an invoice for $250. This was no longer just an annoyance, it was an attack. This woman was literally penalizing me for an act of charity. My frustration began to curdle into a cold resolve. I wasn't going to pay it. But I also knew I couldn't just ignore it. People like Brenda don't just go away, they escalate. The fine was her next move on the chessboard. I needed to figure out my own. The situation got worse when Brenda's focus shifted directly to Mrs. Gable. A notice appeared on the elderly woman's door, citing her for the unapproved modification of her property, namely the removal of snow from her driveway by an unlicensed, non-sanctioned contractor. It was a clear act of retaliation, designed to punish Mrs. Gable for accepting my help and to frighten her into refusing it in the future. Mrs. Gable called me, her voice trembling. "Frank, I don't understand. This letter says I have to pay $50. I'm on a fixed income. And it says you're not allowed to help me anymore." That was it. The breaking point. Attacking me was one thing. I was a business owner, I could handle myself. But going after a vulnerable old woman to make a point was beyond the pale. It was cruel and malicious. My quiet anger ignited into a full-blown inferno. This wasn't about snow anymore. It was about decency. The conflict started to have a ripple effect. Because the HOA, under Brenda's leadership, had failed to properly contract a snow removal service for the common areas, she was likely holding out for the lowest possible bidder to look fiscally responsible. The large parking area by the community mailboxes remained a sheet of packed ice. The mail carrier, citing safety concerns, refused to deliver to the communal boxes. For over a week, our entire neighborhood had to go to the main post office to pick up our mail. It was a massive inconvenience that affected everyone, and people were finally starting to see that Brenda's management was creating more problems than it solved. I knew I was out of my depth. This wasn't a simple dispute with a neighbor anymore, it was a legal battle with a formal entity, however petty. I called a lawyer I'd used for my business contracts, a sharp guy named David Chen. I laid out the whole story in his office, from the first confrontation to the fine against Mrs. Gable and the mail situation. David listened patiently, steepling his fingers. When I was done, he let out a low whistle. "Frank, you've got yourself a classic case of what we call the petty tyrant president. It's incredibly common in HOAs. Someone gets a little bit of power and it goes completely to their head. So what can I do?" I asked. "Can I sue them?" "You can," he said, "but it's a long, expensive road. The HOA has D&O, directors and officers, insurance. They can use community funds to pay their legal fees to fight you. You'd be paying your own dues to fund the legal team working against you. It's a tough setup." My heart sank. So I just have to pay the fine and let her harass an old lady? "No, no," David said, leaning forward. "We don't fight them on their turf. We don't argue about the interpretation of Article 7, Section 4. That's a losing battle of opinions. We need to find a different kind of leverage. Something they can't argue with. The first step is to read every single word of the governing documents, the covenants, the bylaws, the meeting minutes for the last 5 years. Tyrants like this are often so focused on enforcing the rules on others that they get sloppy about following them themselves. He gave me a list of documents to formally request from the HOA board. As a homeowner, I was legally entitled to them. That evening, I drafted a polite but firm email to the HOA secretary, requesting copies of the full bylaws, the current budget, the last 2 years of financial statements, and the minutes from all board meetings since Brenda took office. The response I got was from Brenda herself. It was curt and dismissive. The documents will be made available for your review at the next scheduled board meeting. Please be advised that a copying fee of $1 per page will apply. It was another power play, a delay tactic and a financial hurdle. But I knew I was on the right track. Her resistance told me everything. I replied, CCing my lawyer, David, and quoting the state statute that required them to provide the documents within 10 business days. Her tone changed immediately. The next day, the secretary sent a sheepish email saying the documents would be ready for me to pick up. That weekend was a blur of paper. I had a stack of documents nearly a foot high. I read through the dense legalese of the covenants and the mind-numbing boredom of meeting minutes. I was looking for a crack, any small procedural error or inconsistency. Joining me in this quest was Mr. Henderson, a retired accountant who lived across the street. He was one of the original homeowners in the subdivision and had served on the board in its early, more relaxed days. He despised what Brenda had turned it into. She's running it like a fiefdom, he grumbled, poring over a spreadsheet of the HOA budget. Look at this. Landscaping services, $12,000. That seems awfully high for just mowing the entrance park. And this administrative consulting a fee of $500 a month. To who? It's all so vague. We found small irregularities, meetings held without proper notice, votes taken without a proper quorum, but nothing that felt like a silver bullet. The financials were suspicious, but opaque. There were no detailed invoices, just line items with broad categories. We had a lot of smoke, but no fire. We were frustrated, but not defeated. We knew something was wrong, we just couldn't prove it yet. The pressure was mounting. I received a second fine, this one for $500, for again clearing Mrs. Gable's walkway after a dusting of snow. A certified letter arrived, informing me that the HOA had placed a lien on my property for the unpaid total of $750. This was a serious escalation. A lien could affect my credit, my ability to get loans for my business. It was a direct financial attack meant to cripple me into submission. Brenda wasn't just trying to win an argument, she was trying to ruin me. That's when I realized we were approaching this all wrong. We were trying to fight her within her own system, a system she controlled. We needed to change the game. We needed to get the other homeowners involved, to move the battle from a private dispute into a public forum. The problem was, most people were still too intimidated to speak up. They complained to each other, but they wouldn't confront Brenda. That's when I got the idea for the Facebook group. It was a private group, for Oak Meadows residents only. I called it Oak Meadows Community Forum. I invited a few neighbors I knew were unhappy, including Mr. Henderson. I framed it as a place to share information, organize a neighborhood yard sale, recommend a good plumber, all perfectly innocent. For the first week, it was just that. People posted about lost dogs and upcoming school events. But then, I made my first move. I posted a simple, non-confrontational question, "Hey everyone, I was just looking at the HOA budget and was curious if anyone knows which company handles the landscaping for the common areas. I saw the line item but no company name. Just curious." The post got a few comments. Nobody knew. Then someone else chimed in. I was wondering about that too. And what about the pool maintenance contract? It also seems high. A crack of light appeared. People were willing to ask questions in the relative safety of a private online forum. They just needed someone to go first. Mr. Henderson then posted, "As a former board member, I believe in transparency. I'd be interested to see the detailed invoices for all major expenses. It's our money, after all." The conversation took off. More and more residents joined the group, drawn in by the discussion. The tone shifted from simple curiosity to pointed concern. Why were the financials so vague? Why were the board meetings always held on weekday mornings when most people were at work? Why had the board, without a community vote, given itself the power to levy such high fines? This was the turning point. The discovery of our leverage didn't come from a dusty old document, but from the collective memory and digital archives of the community itself. One of the newer residents, a young tech guy, posted something that changed everything. Hey, I had to get a copy of the HOA members in good standing list last year for my mortgage refinance. It lists every homeowner and whether their dues are paid up. I've attached it here if anyone is interested. A PDF file appeared in the group. It was dated 13 months prior. Mr. Henderson, using his rights as a homeowner, had just requested and received the current list of members in good standing. He called me, his voice electric with excitement. "Frank, you need to come over. Right now. You are not going to believe this." I ran over to his house. On his dining room table, he had two printed lists side by side, the one from a year ago and the current one. He had highlighted 3 names on the current list. Brenda Thompson. And her 2 cronies on the board, a timid man named Gary and a sharp-tongued woman named Carol. Next to their names, in the column labeled due status, was the word delinquent. I stared at it, my mind racing. They haven't paid their dues. Not just this year, Frank, Mr. Henderson said, pointing to the older list. They weren't on this one as delinquent, which means they stopped paying right after Brenda became president. They've been delinquent for at least 12 months. He then slid the thick binder of HOA bylaws across the table, already open to the correct page. His finger rested on a single, beautiful sentence in Article 3, Section 1, any member of the Board of Directors must remain a member in good standing for the duration of their term. A failure to pay dues for a period exceeding 60 days shall result in the automatic forfeiture of their board position. I read the sentence twice, then a third time, the words glowing on the page. It was the silver bullet. It was the nuke. Brenda and her entire ruling faction were illegitimate. They had no legal authority. They hadn't for almost a year. Every rule they had passed, every fine they had levied, every lien they had filed. It was all null and void. They were emperors with no clothes, and we had just found the receipts for their invisible wardrobe. My God, I whispered. She's been fining me for hundreds of dollars while she hasn't paid a cent herself. The hypocrisy was staggering, but the opportunity it presented was even greater. We now had the ultimate leverage. We weren't just fighting a bad policy, we were exposing a fraudulent leadership. My strategy shifted instantly from defense to offense. I called David Chen, my lawyer, and told him what we'd found. There was a long pause on the other end of the line, followed by a slow, delighted laugh. "Frank," he said, "you just won the war. Now, let's plan the victory parade." The plan was simple and devastating. The HOA's annual meeting was scheduled for the following week. It was usually a sleepy affair, but thanks to the buzz created by the Facebook group, attendance was expected to be high. Brenda had even posted a smug notice about it, with an agenda item titled, "Discussion and Action Regarding Persistent Bylaw Violator, Property at 12, Chestnut Drive." That was me. She was planning to use the public meeting to humiliate me, to make an example of me. The irony was almost too perfect. David Chen advised us to keep the information completely secret until the meeting. No posts on the Facebook group, no whispers to neighbors. We needed the element of surprise to be absolute. David agreed to attend the meeting with me, pro bono. I wouldn't miss this for the world, he'd said. We spent the next few days preparing, printing copies of the delinquent lists, the relevant bylaw pages, and a formal motion to invalidate all board actions taken over the past 10 months. The night of the meeting, the community center clubhouse was packed. I had never seen more than 20 people at an HOA meeting. Tonight, there were over 100. The air was thick with tension and resentment. People were crammed into chairs, standing along the walls. They were fed up with the fines, the male situation, the endless, petty rules. They were a powder keg, and Brenda had no idea she was about to light the match. She sat at the head table with her two bored cronies, Gary and Carol, looking smug and powerful. She reveled in the large crowd, likely assuming it was a testament to her effective leadership. She banged the gavel, a flourish of self-importance, and called the meeting to order. They droned through the first few agenda items, a treasurer's report filled with the same vague line items we'd seen before, a landscaping committee update that was just Carol praising Brenda's fiscal prudence. Then, Brenda arrived at my agenda item. She adjusted her glasses and looked down at me in the front row, a predatory smile on her face. And now we come to the unpleasant matter of ongoing covenant violations. Mr. Frank Miller has, despite repeated warnings, continued to operate an unauthorized commercial enterprise within the community, leading to fines which he has refused to pay. The board has already placed a lien on his property, and tonight we will be voting on further legal action. A murmur went through the crowd. This was the moment she had been waiting for. My public execution. Mr. Miller, she said, her voice dripping with false patience. Do you have anything to say for yourself before the board proceeds? I stood up calmly. David Chen stood beside me. Yes, Madam President, I do, I said, my voice steady. But before I address the baseless fines levied against me, I have a procedural question for the board. A point of order. Brenda looked annoyed by the interruption. What is it? I held up a single sheet of paper. I have here a copy of the Oak Meadows bylaws. I'd like to direct the board's attention to Article 3, Section 1. Could the secretary please read the highlighted sentence aloud for the community? I handed the paper to the flustered secretary at the end of the table. Brenda shot me a look of pure venom, but she couldn't refuse a procedural request at a public meeting. The secretary, a nervous woman named Patty, cleared her throat and read, any member of the board of directors must remain a member in good standing for the duration of their term. A failure to pay dues for a period exceeding 60 days shall result in the automatic forfeiture of their board position. A confused silence fell over the room. People didn't understand the relevance. Brenda rolled her eyes. Your point, Mr. Miller. My point, I said, my voice ringing with clarity, is that to be a member in good standing, one must have paid their community dues. I then held up the second document. And this is the official list of members in good standing, provided by this very board just last week. Mr. Henderson is now passing out copies to all of you. Mr. Henderson, poised at the back, began handing stacks of the paper down each row. A rustling sound filled the room as dozens of homeowners looked at the list. They saw the three highlighted names, Brenda Thompson, Gary Smith, Carol Finch. And next to them, the word, delinquent. The silence was replaced by a wave of gasps and angry whispers. What is this? Someone shouted from the back. Brenda's face went from smug to confused to chalk white in a matter of seconds. She snatched the paper and stared at it, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. I let the reality sink in for a moment before delivering the final blow. According to your own records, I announced, my voice booming in the suddenly quiet room, you, and board members Smith and Finch, have been delinquent on your dues for approximately 1 year. Which means, according to the bylaws you love to quote, you automatically forfeited your positions on this board nearly a year ago. You have no authority. This board is illegitimate. And every single action you have taken for the past 10 months, every rule, every fine, every lien, including the one on my property, is null and void. The room erupted. It was absolute pandemonium. People were on their feet, shouting, pointing at the board. The anger that had been simmering for a year boiled over in an instant. Brenda started sputtering, her composure completely shattered. This is a mistake. A clerical error. It's a lie. But the evidence was right there, in black and white, in everyone's hands. Her authority, built on a foundation of intimidation and unwavering adherence to the rules, crumbled to dust the moment she was exposed as a hypocrite who didn't follow the most basic rule of all. Her two cronies looked like they wanted the floor to swallow them whole. Gary was sweating profusely, and Carol was staring at her hands, refusing to look at the crowd. David Chen stepped forward. "There is no mistake," he said, his lawyerly voice cutting through the noise. "These are official HOA records. This board has been operating fraudulently. We demand the immediate resignation of Mrs. Thompson, Smith, and Finch. Furthermore, we will be making a motion for a full, independent, forensic audit of the HOA's finances for the past 2 years." The call for an audit sent a fresh wave of panic across Brenda's face. That was the moment I knew. It wasn't just that she hadn't paid her dues. There was more. The vague invoices, the inflated costs Mr. Henderson had noticed. It all clicked into place. She hadn't just been breaking the rules, she had been stealing. Mr. Henderson stood up. "I second the motion," he yelled, and the crowd roared its approval. "All in favor of removing this fraudulent board and launching a full audit." Nearly every hand in the room shot up. It was a tidal wave of righteous fury. Brenda, completely defeated, threw down her gavel. "This meeting is adjourned," she shrieked, and then she turned and fled, pushing her way through the angry crowd and out the door into the night. Her reign was over. It had ended not with a bang, but with the rustle of incriminating paper. The aftermath of that meeting was swift and decisive. With Brenda and her cronies gone, an interim board was established, with Mr. Henderson reluctantly agreeing to serve as president to oversee the transition. The first official act of the new board was to void every fine and violation notice issued during Brenda's tenure. The lien on my property was removed the very next day. It felt like a great weight had been lifted not just from me, but from the entire community. The forensic audit that David Chen had called for began a week later. It didn't take long for the auditors to uncover the rot. Brenda hadn't just been delinquent on her dues, she had been systematically embezzling HOA funds. The administrative consulting fee was being paid to a shell company she had created. The inflated landscaping contract was with a company owned by her brother-in-law, who was kicking back a portion of the profits to her. She had used the HOA debit card for personal expenses, from expensive dinners to online shopping, disguising them under vague categories in the budget. All told, she had stolen over $40,000 from her neighbors. When the audit report was presented to the community, the anger was replaced by a grim sense of betrayal. This wasn't just a petty tyrant anymore, this was a common criminal. The findings were turned over to the local police, and a formal investigation was launched. A few months later, Brenda Thompson was arrested and charged with multiple counts of felony embezzlement and fraud. Her 2 cronies, Gary and Carol, were not charged criminally, as they seemed to be ignorant accomplices rather than active participants in the theft, but their reputations in the neighborhood were destroyed forever. They both sold their houses and moved away within the year. Brenda's trial was a quiet affair, a far cry from her loud, domineering presence at HOA meetings. She pleaded guilty to avoid a longer sentence, her high and mighty demeanor replaced by the pathetic, downcast look of a caught thief. She was sentenced to 18 months in a low-security prison and ordered to pay full restitution to the Oak Meadows Homeowners Association. The day the first restitution check arrived was a day of quiet celebration for us all. With the corrupt board gone, the community began to heal and reform itself. Mr. Henderson, true to his word, led the charge to rewrite the bylaws. We held town halls, got feedback from everyone, and crafted a new set of covenants that were based on common sense and mutual respect, not on control and punishment. The new rules were simple: be respectful of your neighbors, maintain your property reasonably, and contribute to the community. The Architectural Review Committee was disbanded. The mailbox rule was scrapped. The ridiculous trash can hours were eliminated. We elected a new board, composed of reasonable people who saw their role as serving the community, not ruling it. Transparency became our guiding principle. The budget was posted online for all to see, with every single invoice scanned and attached. Meetings were held on evenings and weekends so more people could attend. The HOA became what it was always supposed to be, a tool to facilitate a clean, safe, and friendly neighborhood. My reputation in the community was, to my surprise and slight embarrassment, transformed. I was no longer just Frank, the guy with the plow. I was Frank, the guy who took down Brenda. People would stop me in the street to thank me. Neighbors I'd only ever waved to before now knew my name and wanted to shake my hand. Mrs. Gable baked me a mountain of cookies and declared me her personal hero. I appreciated the sentiment, but I never saw myself as a hero. I was just a guy who was pushed too far and decided to push back. I had simply wanted to be left alone, but in the end, I had been forced to fight for the right of the entire community to be left alone. A couple of years passed. Oak Meadows thrived. The oppressive atmosphere was gone, replaced by a renewed sense of neighborliness. Property values, which had stagnated under Brenda's reign of terror, began to climb again as word got out that Oak Meadows was a great place to live. The community Facebook group I had started became a genuine hub of positive interaction, a place for organizing block parties and helping out neighbors in need. One afternoon, I was in the local grocery store, looking at bags of rock salt in preparation for the coming winter. I turned a corner and almost ran right into her. It was Brenda. She had been released from prison a few months earlier. She looked diminished. Her hair was different, her clothes were plain, and the fiery, arrogant light in her eyes was gone, replaced by a sort of dull, permanent exhaustion. She was just another middle-aged woman buying milk. Our eyes met for a second. A flash of recognition, of shame, crossed her face. She quickly looked down at her shopping cart and hurried away down the aisle without a word. I felt no anger, no satisfaction, no desire for revenge. I just felt a quiet, detached sense of pity. Her obsession with power and control had cost her everything, her home, her reputation, her freedom. She had built her own prison long before the state had locked her in one. I finished my shopping and went home. That evening, the first snowflakes of the season began to fall. They were light and gentle at first, then heavier, promising a significant accumulation by morning. I looked out the window at the quiet, peaceful street, the houses warm and glowing against the falling snow. I knew that in the morning, I would get up before the sun, fire up my plow, and clear a path for my neighbors. This time, though, it would be different. I wouldn't be looking over my shoulder, waiting for a confrontation. I would be doing it with the full knowledge and support of a community that understood the difference between rules and righteousness, between control and cooperation. I had fought a war I never wanted, but the peace we had won was worth every ounce of the fight. The engine of my truck would rumble to life not as an act of defiance, but as a simple act of neighborly kindness. And in Oak Meadows, that was finally something to be celebrated, not punished. The long, cold winter was coming, but our community had never been warmer.